My name is Adam Palmer, and I am the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist for Tenable. And I will be presenting to you some thoughts about evolving to risk-based vulnerability management. Just a little background of me. I've been focused on cybersecurity for almost 20 years. I was a former CISO and also the Global Director for Cyber Risk at one of the largest banks in Europe. I'm based in Ireland. And I cover all of Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Tenable. So a little bit about Tenable. We are rated by numerous industry groups, third-party groups, as #1 in vulnerability management. This is recognized by groups like IDC and Forrester that have named us in their most recent reports as the market leader for vulnerability management. Also, by the way, we've been in business for close to 20 years, and we are a global public company listed on the NASDAQ in the United States. So the reason I'm going to focus on a risk-based approach to cybersecurity is exactly here in a report by McKinsey released last year. They noted that you can improve your overall cybersecurity risk by almost 8 times at no added cost by following a cybersecurity risk-based approach. Now, some of you who are listening to me probably say you already follow a risk-based approach. And this is how I felt when I worked at other organizations. But what I'm going to describe to you, I think, is a real, true risk-based approach and a better way to execute this in a way that's really going to increase your efficiency and improve security. A true risk-based approach, as McKinsey notes, would be an organization where you don't build controls everywhere. You focus on building the appropriate controls for the worst vulnerabilities to defeat the most significant threats that are targeting your most critical areas. So how do you do that, and why does it actually save you money? It saves money because the initial investment you make in improving your vulnerability management program might be more, but over time you will save money by prioritizing the right areas and investing in the right controls and becoming more efficient. That's how you save money long term. So why is this important? So let's just stop for just a second and talk about the expanding cyber exposure gap. In all of the organizations I've worked at, and maybe some of the ones that you work at, I've primarily focused on the bottom IT layer there, the web applications, the servers, the desktops, the laptops, the mobile phones. This is the traditional assets, if you're a security leader, that you probably understand and work with daily. But now you have all these other areas. So cloud has gotten a lot of attention in the last few years. With working and trying to secure cloud-based applications, but also now OT, operational technology. And don't just think about this as industrial technology. Think about all of the connected smart devices that might be in your company. So HVAC, access controls. Just think about anything that probably has some data connection port on that device. So all of this has created a lot of efficiency and better connected organizations. But all of a sudden, the physical security environment is converging through operational technology with the IT environment. Even if it's just a couple seconds a day or an integrator who comes in and plugs into those tools, a lot of times now they're transferring data and they're connected to your network. And of course, we have all the remote work from home persons in the current environment that are connecting to your network, and all of these new devices. And by the way, some of the OT devices can be completely obsolete. Maybe they're 20 years old, never upgraded, really in terms of IT technology, ancient operating systems. So, you know, some of these devices create or could expose your network to substantial risk. And you may not see any of these assets. They may be invisible to you. So you can only protect what you know about. So it's important first to know what all of your assets are, and then obviously focus on what's the most critical. The problem is that legacy vulnerability management tools, and many of the ones that you're probably using now, just simply can't keep up with this expanded threat landscape. the modern attack surface. They have limited visibility, often only to that IT layer or active devices. They don't effectively prioritize. And really, the reports that you get from these devices, it's difficult to effectively report if you're a CISO or security leader to business leaders what your actual risk is and where you're exposed. So just to step back a moment and talk about how a lot of organizations that I work with prioritize risk, they use the common vulnerability CVSS scores. Now, to understand why this can be a challenge is a lot of organizations will focus on CVSS scores that are rated high or critical. So in a recent study by Tenable, we found that almost 56% of all vulnerabilities are rated high or critical. They also are risk unaware. There's no context. So you receive a CVSS score that could be 2 weeks old. So again, it's not tied to an asset. You don't know how critical this is, and you're just told that it's a high risk vulnerability. So imagine if you're a large organization and you receive 100,000 vulnerabilities, CVSS score vulnerabilities, 56,000 of those would need to be remediated and addressed. So if you're doing this, you can't possibly fully address all of these risks. What happens is your team ends up wasting the majority of your time chasing the wrong issues. So it's a fundamental data problem. Regardless of the size of your organization, your security team, you will never have enough resources to remediate every vulnerability across your attack surface if you're following this approach. And it leads to a lot of frustration with the IT team if they're receiving 56,000 or thousands of requests, and you cannot possibly follow up to assure that each of those has been effectively remediated. So I also want to talk about, and this is before we'll get into the details of how to do this the right way, but two common security mistakes that I think organizations make as they approach risk management. The first is the RAG score. This is the red, amber, green score. In a recent webinar that I presented, I asked the participants to do a survey of how many of their organizations conducted or used the RAG score approach, the milestone approach to cybersecurity. 85% of the participants said they used this. And in every organization I worked at, we use this in some form. So this is, you have a risk, it's red. In Q2 or Q3, you've implemented about half of the tool that you've implemented to address the risk. Now you change the color of the risk to amber. And in Q4, it's green, and you say you successfully addressed the risk, you fully deployed the tool. Now, what does that really tell you about the risk? Nothing. All you know is that you've deployed a tool. You don't actually know, is this a priority risk? You don't know if the assets that you've protected are critical assets or how they necessarily function. And you really don't know if this tool has effectively reduced the risk or what impact it's had on the security of your organization. And now I'm going to play a quick video for you this is from the Chief Financial Officer of the Target Corporation in the United States, talking about their data breach from 2007. I don't know what approach they followed, but it sounds like a RAG sort of approach where what you'll hear is him talking about all of the capacity they built, basically a capacity building model where they just spent a lot of money on different capabilities, but never once talking about a risk, never once saying we knew what our critical risks were and we were trying to address those. So just listen for a moment. Again, I don't know for sure if that's the approach they took, but I think that the way he describes it sounds similar to a capacity building milestone type approach.
For many years, Target has invested significant capital and resources in security technology, personnel, and processes. We had in place multiple layers of protection, including firewalls, malware detection, intrusion detection and prevention capabilities, and data loss prevention tools. But the unfortunate reality is that we suffered a breach. All businesses and their customers are facing increasingly sophisticated threats from cyber criminals.
Okay, so again, not knowing specifically what approach they use, but it does sound an awful lot like a milestone approach where you're focused on spending a lot of money just blindly building capability and controls without actually.
In fact, news reports have indicated that
Sorry.
several other companies have been
We'll let it
subjected to similar attacks.
Blindly building controls without actually knowing what the actual risks are. And this is the problem. You have low visibility of all of your assets and digital platforms. It leads to a false sense of security based on incomplete data. You have exploits that are easily attacked by outside attackers. You're spending time and effort addressing low risks, and you really can't communicate effectively how you're reducing risk to senior leaders. So what I would suggest to you is it's not adequate to build capabilities. You really have to focus on, are you reducing risk? There's one other mistake that was described to me, and I'll share with you, called the beat the bear fallacy that some organizations follow. What is the beat the bear fallacy? And this was actually first described to me by the chief risk officer of a large European bank. And what he told me is a story of two persons are going for a walk in the forest. One of them, and they know there's bears in the forest. So one of them starts to put on running shoes. And the one friend says, you know, you can't possibly outrun the bears. And the friend putting on running shoes says, I don't need to outrun the bears. I only need to outrun you. And this was the approach that the chief risk officer was taking. But this is a mistake, because you realize that there really is a much better way. You're just hoping in this instance that the company across the street, the organization next to you, might get attacked first, and that you won't get attacked if you're slightly better. But when you really realize that this isn't a very sophisticated approach to risk management, and it continues to cost you more money, and you will blindly be applying controls, not knowing if what you're doing is actually effective. And there is a better approach, and that's what we're finally now going to talk about. After all the mistakes, let's talk about the right way to approach cybersecurity vulnerability management, which is what Gartner here describes. Gartner, the leading industry association, talks about that by 2022, organizations that use the Tenable type risk-based vulnerability management approach will suffer 80% fewer data breaches. So what is the right approach? How does Tenable approach this? So we look at proper vulnerability risk-based management as having two critical parts. The first is a vulnerability priority rating. We call this the VPR. So this leverages our machine learning and our proprietary algorithms to calculate a priority of the vulnerability based on the real threat it's posed. So what am I talking about? It's talking about knowing, not a blind vulnerability out of context, but knowing what's the threat, how recent is the threat, how intense is it, how easily can it exploit other assets, what is it doing in the wild, is it actually being used, do we see exploits being created, again, how old is it, and what's the threat source? Is it nation state? Is it cyber criminals? But it's understanding the vulnerability and how dangerous it is. And then there's the issue of context, of course, which I mentioned. So the opposite of blindly building capabilities is knowing the context. And if I'll ask you a question, if I ask you, what's the risk of a bald tire? What's the risk of a bald tire? So in a recent survey that I also conducted, about close to 90% of the participants said a bald tire would create maybe a high risk, that's how they would rate it. But in fact, it's a trick question, because I haven't given you any context. If I tell you now that the tire is not on my car, in fact, it's a swing, it's a toy for my children to play on, and then you understand that the risk is actually zero. It poses no threat to my car at all. And this is why the importance of the second piece that we talk about in proper cyber risk management is the asset criticality rating, the ACR. Again, we use our algorithms, machine learning, and data to look at the asset criticality. So this is looking at what is the business purpose of the asset in your organization, what type of device it is, what does it connect to, what are its capabilities, where is it located, what type of data does it have on it, does it contain third-party data, or is it accessed by third parties? So between the VPR and the ACR, you have a complete picture. You have deep knowledge about the vulnerability, and you understand the criticality of the asset. This helps you to prioritize based on the importance of the asset and the risk posed by the vulnerabilities on that asset. So you focus first on what matters the most. And that's true risk management versus, I think, the other things I would call risk assessment or blind capability building. But this is true cybersecurity risk management. And what is the benefit of this? What does Tenable see with the customers that apply this? The important number to see here is 97%. That's the reduction in vulnerabilities that need to be remediated with the impact to the attack surface that our customers see when they follow this approach. It means they reduce their workload to just 3 to 5% of what they previously saw in most cases. And you're not focusing on all those 56,000 CVS high critical vulnerabilities. You're focusing on just the 3 to 5% that are really being exploited and could harm critical assets in your organization. What I often say is that if you have an aggressive, strong vulnerability management program, it's the foundation of your strategy, and almost nothing else matters because you're focusing on now how to prioritize and be efficient. And this is where the cost savings comes in. So you're saving a lot of money by not investing in risks and tools that you might not really need, and you're focusing your team time on where they're the most effective. And overall, you're improving security, as McKinsey said, almost 8 times by doing this. So compared to those other sort of approaches that I think are the mistaken approaches, this is a much smarter and powerful way to approach cybersecurity risk management. Also, when you think about this approach, it really meets if you're using some type of NIST related standard. I know a lot of organizations, this is a US standard for cybersecurity framework, but it really tells you, how to do or what to do, but not really how to do it. But it checks, following this approach really checks all the boxes probably on any standard that is related to NIST. And a lot of standards have some similarity to NIST, but it's talking about identifying what's important to your business, protecting and making sure you have all the safeguards to ensure the confidentiality and access to your data, detecting the bad things that are happening on your network, having an effective response capability, and being able to recover and restore after there's been a data breach. If you have visibility of all of your assets, if you know what's critical and you know how they might be exploited, knowing that your assets and knowing your attack surface are the most critical 2 things you need to have an effective response and start down a road to effective compliance. So this is really, I say, the key. And I haven't talked really about any features of any of our tools at Tenable. We're talking really about the most fundamental thing, which I think is your cyber exposure strategy. How are you going to not build capabilities, but answer the question, are you reducing risk? How are you going to prioritize resources, reduce cost, improve efficiency, optimize your team, and ultimately reduce risk?